God's blessings to you today. It's been cold here recently in eastern Michigan, and it's going to go down into the teens this coming week. And at the nighttime, they say it's going to be below zero. So it's cold here, but enjoying the sunshine today. It's nice to see the sun breaking through the clouds. And I wanted to speak today about the matter of calling. Calling. And what I mean by that is the sense that God wants you to do something. That's about as broad as I can make it. And over the years, a few times people have asked me about my sense of calling into the ministry. I have done work as a pastor and still continue to lead a home church. And people will ask me occasionally about when I knew that God wanted me to become a pastor and to preach and that sort of thing. And I've answered in different ways, but I'm always, I want to say, reluctant to answer, slow to answer, because it's something that's ineffable, which is to say that it's really impossible to describe accurately. I was reading something recently saying it this way: the call of God, it's like the call of the sea. It's like the call of the mountains. It's like the call of the great ice barriers. And he goes on to say in this particular reading here, the call is only heard by the one to whom it comes, the one who is sensitive to it. It only comes to a select few. And that is true in that sense. If you come from, for example, the mountains, the Smoky Mountains, and you grow up in those great hills and beautiful mountainous areas, you have this affinity to this kind of area, it seems. It's easy to have that. It's understandable, right? That you would be drawn to the mountains, and that goes in the direction of where I'm going. That you're drawn to that if you grow up in the islands, I'm sure, in the Caribbean and the sea, and you've worked quite a bit out on the ocean as a fisherman. You can see why a man or a woman would be drawn and compelled to be in that kind of environment. And if they were placed somewhere out in a very arid area, they would be homesick, and they would be, again, missing the great open seas. And if you're from the great north, you can see how, again, you would be so drawn to that. If you grow up in the country, you might never be happy in a busy city, in an urban area where there's so much congestion and that sort of thing. So we have this sensitivity in us, and we say, what is that exactly? It is something that is impossible in the long run to fully explain with words, but there is this sense in us. Let me read a passage, if I can, to you from the Old Testament book of Jeremiah. It's past the halfway point in the Bible, if you want to turn there, and it's the first chapter. And I'm looking at a section which has to do with his call. The heading in this Bible says, The Call of Jeremiah. And Jeremiah was a great prophet. He was a man that spoke forth for God. He was known as the weeping prophet because he saw so much calamity and suffered a great bit of persecution in his own life because he confronted the corrupt authorities and the corrupt priesthood at the time. And he is, at this point, being called into his ministry work. And I'm looking at verse 4 of chapter 1. It says, The word of the Lord came to me. This is Jeremiah giving his personal testimony, if we would say it that way. Before I formed you in the womb, I knew you. That's God speaking. Before I formed you in the womb, I knew you. Before you were born, I consecrated you. I appointed you a prophet to the nations. And then I said, Ah, Lord God, behold, I don't know how to speak, for I'm only a youth. But the Lord said to me, Do not say, I am only a youth. For to all to whom I send you, you shall go, and whatever I command you, you shall speak. Do not be afraid of them, for I am with you to deliver you, declares the Lord. He goes on to say, Then the Lord put out his hand and touched my mouth, and the Lord said to me, Behold, I've put my words in your mouth. See, I have set you this day over nations and over kingdoms, to pluck up and to break down, to destroy and to overthrow, to build and to plant. And so God was calling him to this role of a spokesman for God to kings and to nations. And of course, he had great hesitation in that area. And I don't ever know who exactly I'm talking to with these videos, but it may be that you wonder about what it is that God would have you do in your role in your life. I'd like to just say some things about calling and service. Let's just stop and analyze that thought for a minute here. The notion of calling. What is this thing we call call? You say Jeremiah was called. Pastors may say, I was called into the ministry at such and such an age. A call is an appeal. A call is a sense of need, a compunction, a sense of, I must do something. I think we can use the word, in like so many words, in various ways with various nuances, but I wrote down several words here, and I think one is this idea of being addressed. God is addressing us if we speak of a spiritual call. God is addressing us in some particular way. We talk about the call of the mountains and the call of the sea. That can be understood as not just an address, but an alluring, an allure, a drawing. And the two are not entirely separate from one another when we think even of the call of a man or a woman to a particular spiritual work. A call is this sense of, I am to do something. God is speaking to me about something. I feel, and here's a word I've used over the years, impressed. These are all inadequate terms. I am impressed. I feel impressed. I feel this urging, there's another word, inside of me to do something. Now, this can be extremely vague. I don't know what it is that God is impressing upon me, but something is stirring. There's another metaphor that I'm alluding to. There is this sense of stirring. You know, when you're sitting before, for example, a bowl of soup, and it's hot and steamy, and you drop some crackers into it. It's so easy and so common to just stir it up a little bit. I like to stir it up. If I have a chili or I make something myself, some other dish or something that's liquidy, I almost always will stir it up. And this is a sense within us that God is stirring. You want to say, what is this about? And the truth of the matter is, I think with this sense of need, it continues to impress upon you. There may be a particular time, I can point to a particular time in my own experience when I was very young, where this was very obvious and very clear. But it may not necessarily come so dramatically all at one time. It may begin to gradually stir again and foment inside of us. It may be even as I talk to you now that there is some area in your own personal experience where you just sense that God is stirring up something and you don't know what it is. To that I say, be patient. If God is beginning to impress something on you, don't fight that. Don't resist that, which is the easiest thing in the world to do when you sense it's something you don't want to do. Don't resist that. Just be patient and be open to what it is that God is attempting to convey to you. Jesus said over and over again, he who has what? Ears to hear, what? Let him hear. Open your ears, open your eyes, open your mind in the sense of being open to what it is that God may be wanting from you. And He will speak. Ask Him to speak. Ask Him to clarify. I don't think that was all that necessary at this point with Jeremiah. There he was. We don't know the exact setting at the time, but God directly speaks to him. He says, the word of the Lord. That's an expression that comes up over and over and over again, especially with the prophets. The word of the Lord came to me and said this. A word comes to them. What is that to say? Are we talking about an audible word? Probably not. We weren't there, so we don't know. And this is the thing about people's religious experiences. When people ask you, what do you think about it? Most of the time, we weren't there. We can't judge these things because they are just that, personal experiences. And in this moment, I would assume, and it's just an assumption on my part, that God impressed something very strongly on his mind. We have to remember that, we're so privileged to have the full array of the biblical texts here. We have 66 books in the Bible and a whole history and a plethora of information that most of the biblical writers only had bits and pieces to draw from. But probably God had this sense where he's speaking right into his spirit, right into his mind, and conveying this. And he says, before I formed you in the womb, I knew you. Let's stop and think about that for a minute. God is overarching all of it. He is superintending all of it. He is guiding all of it. Before you were even born, I had a purpose for you. I would think Jeremiah's mouth was probably open at that time, gaping wide. Before I formed you in the womb, Jeremiah, I knew you. Before you were even conceived, before you were born, I consecrated you, and appointed you to be a prophet to the nations. That's really something to think about, isn't it? Before you were born, I knew you would be born. I already knew you, and I knew the life direction you would take, because I'm directing that direction. I'm directing your life. I would direct your life at this point, and I will cause you to be my spokesman. So a calling is a sense of need. It's an address. It's an appeal. It's a request, if we want to say it that way, from the divine Spirit of God to our hearts. Second word I would talk about would be that of service. In other words, the work. We have the call, we have the need, but then we have the response or the work that we're to do. This is where it has to touch down. This is my, if I can say it this way, and I say it gingerly, the interpretation of the need, the calling. I sense God is telling me to do something. I think God is wanting me to do X over here. All right. What is X? What is that? I'm asking that even to you now. What is the need? What is it he's saying to you? What has he been saying? Perhaps this is something on a smaller scale. That's fine. You sense God is directing you in some particular way. I don't know if I should be in this place right now. I don't know if we should be in this church right now. I don't know if I need to go to this church. I don't know that I need to do the work that I'm doing right now. I think it's time for some kind of change. And what is the change? See, we have to, if I can say it this way, and this is, again, the synergism, the working of the two forces here, the divine and the human. This is where God is speaking to us, and now we have to somehow conjoin ourselves with the voice of God and interpret what he's saying. In a sense, it's like I'm talking to you now. You're interpreting what I'm saying. There is what I say, and then it's a matter of you hearing what I'm saying. How are you hearing it? How are you listening? This is where we have to fine-tune our interpretive skills. Now, I'm assuming a lot here, I suppose. I'm assuming that you understand that God is God, that he speaks. If you don't know God, if you don't have a close relationship with God, you haven't come to him through his Son, all of this is essentially gibberish to you. But God, even if you're not a Christian, it could be that even through instances like this right now, this video, God is speaking to you. You have to interpret that. You have to say, what is going on here? What is the message? Haven't you found sometimes the message just keeps coming back and again and again and again, back and back and back? You may hear someone say something over the airwaves, and then, before you know it, you read something, and it's consistent with that. Then someone says to you, makes a side remark, and it's the same message. The message keeps coming back again and again. It's almost like an echo from the hills. I think God's trying to tell me something. Maybe he is. God speaks if we're able to listen. God speaks if we're able to listen. So here again, there's the calling and the need, but then there's the service, the matter of the work, the matter of the action. This has to do with the function. What I am to do specifically, more specifically, and this may take a long time to really hone down and to filter it down and to funnel it down to a particular activity. But what is it that God is wanting you to do? It may not be all that cloudy. It may just be a matter of you not wanting to do it. You do remember Jonah in the Old Testament? I want you to go to Nineveh, my favorite Old Testament Bible character. I want you to go over to what was the capital of Assyria to the east. And Jonah says, no, I'm going west. And this led to a great series of disasters and almost cost many people their lives. But there is the cooperation and the resistance. So assuming you're not resisting God, what is it that he wants you to do? Whatever it is, most likely it's suited to your personality or will be suited to you as a person. God will never call you or me to do something where he will not provide the spiritual enabling to do it. You say, I feel sometimes like I ought to stand up and sing for God. I just love music and I want to sing. If you're called to that, and you say to yourself, still, though, I'm not the greatest singer. I'm no Carrie Underwood. I'm no whatever. If you are able to carry a tune and God has been impressing you to express your talent this way, and it is God speaking, then don't worry about the professionalism. Don't worry about being the best you could possibly be in that area. Just do what God would have you do. God has a way of calling all kinds of people to do things that seem very unlikely for them. And yet, if he calls them to do it, they can do it. They will be able to, you will be able to carry out the service that he has for you to execute by his enabling. He will never call you to do something that he will not execute properly in your life. Problem is we compare ourselves to other people so much of the time. I could never do it like her. I could never be like him. That has no bearing on it whatsoever when it comes to the call of God. Jeremiah was called himself to do the work he was to do. Before I formed you in the womb, I knew you. Before you were born, I concentrated you. The Lord put his hand on my mouth. He touched my mouth. And he said to me, behold, I have put my words in your mouth. You don't have to speak for anyone else. You don't have to represent anyone else. You represent him. And I do what God would have me do. Is there something perhaps, and I could go on and on about all of this, is there something perhaps that God is impressing upon you to do in his work, in his kingdom? Then trust him and he will lead you to do that. The calling of God is unique to each person and it's indescribable, but it's very real. And once you have that sense in you, no one can shake that from you. You may come to question it at times. You might come to say, I don't know at this point if this is what I'm due to do anymore. God will redirect you if it's time to redirect you. But when his call is on your life, trust him and know that he will allow you to do and he will enable you to do the things he wants you to do. With Jeremiah, it says in the 10th verse there, to pluck up, to break down. Quite graphic, isn't it? To destroy, to overthrow, to build, and to plant. There's going to be tearing down. There's going to be building up. There's going to be impact from our lives as God works through us in changing the lives of other people in other places. So trust him with all these things, and perhaps there's again a word for you today. May the Lord bless you. May the Lord keep you. May the Lord make his face to shine upon you and be gracious to you. May he lift up his countenance upon you. And once again this day give you peace. Take care.